Hey everybody, thank you for joining us and welcome to our webinar on the search for Bonhomme Richard, flagship of John Paul Jones. We're going to do a little intro here, and I think we'll probably have a couple people joining at 12:01 or 12:02, and that's okay. I'm Melissa Ryan. I'm Vice President here at the Global Foundation for Ocean Exploration. We're a nonprofit organization based in Connecticut, and we design, build, and operate deepwater robots or remotely operated vehicles that can go to 6,000 meters in the ocean. So our mission is to explore. We also have a talented group of videographers who work with us who take the video from the ROV and make fantastic video products that tell the stories of our exploration. And I'm also a biologist and an educator, and the chief architect of the search for Bonhomme Richard, which I started back in 2005. So I'm joined by my colleague, Daniel Rogers from the Consortium for Ocean Leadership, and I'll ask Dan to introduce himself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dan Rogers, and I worked for many years with the Global Foundation for Ocean Exploration with Melissa and Caitlin, who's also on. I worked primarily as an ROV pilot and engineer, primarily on the Okeanos Explorer, but also a couple of other ships when we had the opportunity. Since then, I've started working at the Consortium for Ocean Leadership, which is a group that's based in downtown Washington, D.C. The group does a lot of really good work in education and outreach for ocean issues. Does a lot of good policy guiding work in Washington, D.C. related to ocean policy, and excited to stay in the ocean exploration community there. So
we would also like to introduce Caitlin Bailey, who's part of our team here at GFOE, and she's kind of working behind the scenes to make sure that the webinar runs smoothly, and she'll be monitoring the chat as well. So if you have any problems, you might hear from Caitlin. So today we're excited to share this journey with you. It's an amazing adventure, shipwreck hunting, and I'm hoping there will be something for everybody. We're going to talk about history and research and science, technology, and then Dan is going to share our most recent expedition and the findings from that mission. And we'll leave a lot of time for your questions at the end. I know that's kind of where some of the good stuff comes out sometimes, my favorite part of our presentation. Just a little housekeeping, everybody is muted right now. And will remain throughout the webinar, but you can communicate with us through the chat box and through the Q&A box. And to find that, if you scroll your cursor over the top part of your screen, you should see that pop up on the upper right. And so we'll save the questions till the end, and that will be about 30 minutes from now. Okay. Let's begin. So the year is 1779. America is immersed in the Revolutionary War. We're fighting for our independence from England. Captain John Paul Jones is on a raiding mission along the coast of Britain. Now, a lot of people think that the Revolutionary War was fought on American soil only, but that's not true. Jones brought the war to the enemy. So he's captain of a ship called Bonhomme Richard. He's sailing with his squadron off Scarborough, England, when he sees a convoy of Royal Navy ships coming over the horizon. And these ships contain dockyard supplies to build more ships. So one of them, the British ship Serapis, comes out to engage him with a small squadron, while the other British ships take shelter in Scarborough Harbor. Now, Serapis is a bigger, brand new ship. It has more cannon power, more sail power, and a well-trained crew. Jones is already at a disadvantage. He does not have any of those things. He's recruited some of his crew, in fact, in the English pubs. So the ships engage for the next 2.5 hours, and Jones takes a beating. Bonhomme Richard takes a beating. At one point, he tries to sail into position to fire at Serapis, but the wind dies, and he ends up alongside her, stern to bow, which is what you see in this image, with Bonhomme Richard in the front and Serapis in the back. He lashes the ships together. He thinks very quickly, lashes the ships together with grappling hooks because he knows this is going to cripple Serapis's cannons. They can't shoot at that close a range. And he thinks the only way I'm going to win this is hand-to-hand combat. So he sends a boarding party to try to board the Serapis, but he's unsuccessful. The fighting has begun again with guns from above decks, and there are actually a group of French Marines that you can see where my cursor is up in the tops here. And they're trying to fire down, shooting anybody on top of the Serapis's deck. The fight goes on for another hour. Both ships are blazing, they're on fire. They have to keep stopping the battle in order to put out the fires. The Bonhomme Richard now has 5 feet of water in her hold, so she's starting to sink. 2 of the Bonhomme Richard crew members try to find John Paul Jones to tell him that their ship is sinking. They can't find him because he's on the foredeck manning a cannon, and they assume he's dead, and they call for quarters or surrender. So the Serapis captain hears this and says, "Do you mean to strike?" Meaning strike your colors and give up. Well, Jones, hearing all of this, shouts, "No, I'll sink, but I'm damned if I'll strike." And many years later, an account of the battle from one of the crew members quotes him as saying, his very famous quote, "I have not yet begun to fight." And those are the words that have lived on in American history. So eventually, Jones is victorious. One of his men throws a grenade down onto the Serapis and ignites its gunpowder stores. You can imagine the horror of that. He then takes Serapis as a prize, but the 2 ships drift together for about 36 hours while they try to make repairs. He knows he's got to get off the British coast. People are watching this battle from shore, by the way, because the British Royal Navy is going to be after him. He's an enemy. So the Bonhomme Richard can't be saved after 36 hours, and Jones watches his beloved ship sink into the North Sea. And when he was describing this in the letter, he said, "I saw with inexpressible grief the last glimpse." So he then goes on to sail the Serapis to Holland, where he sells her to get money to pay his crew and moves on with his career. So that's kind of the 2-minute version of the battle. This picture, this is a typical gun deck of a ship like that, and you can imagine being fired out with cannonballs coming through the sides of the ship. And when they do that, it's a violent action because it just sends showers of all kinds of splinters, big splinters, little splinters at very high speeds. So you can imagine the injuries that would result from that, while everybody's still trying to man a cannon and there's 200 people on this deck. So a pretty awful scene. This is a quote from the midshipman on the Bonhomme Richard, and where he says, "One might have drove in with a coach and 6. He's referring to a carriage and 6 horses. So that is how badly the ship is damaged. Huge holes in it. Okay, so just to orient everybody, this was the location of the battle. We're working quite a ways up the coast of England, almost to Scotland actually. And then Flamborough Head is this tiny little point of land sticking out by the star. And the water depth here is 65 meters, so we're quite a ways offshore. We're not right against the shoreline there. Okay, a little bit about the ship. Important to note, it was loaned to the Continental Navy by France. We did not pay them back. Jones took Serapis as a prize and sold it. So the French spent a lot of money outfitting this ship, and it had, pretty fancy outfit for a warship. It had iron ballast, which was about 200 tons, and that was unusual in those days. Usually they used big rocks or river stones, whatever they could find, to fill up the belly of the ship and help it to be stable. And the ship was named after, Benjamin Franklin, who was Jones's good friend. And Ben Franklin was in Paris at the time, being the ambassador for America. And he was writing a publication called Poor Richard's Almanac. So that's where the Richard comes from. And Bonhomme is French, meaning good man, wise man. Here's a few stats: 147 feet long by 40 feet wide. Had 34 cannon, which are called guns as soon as you set foot on the ship. They jettisoned 6 of their biggest cannons when they knew that the ship was taking on water. And we know that there should be 28 12-pounders retained, hopefully somewhere in the rubble. Bonhomme Richard had huge bower anchors, weighing a ton each. Those are the bow anchors, by the way. Okay, so where do you even begin to look for a shipwreck? I think finding a shipwreck is easier than finding the shipwreck. So just with surveying, you can often come across things that you don't intend to find. And when you're looking for one specific one, it makes it a bit harder. So you do a lot of homework. And most of our homework we owe to Peter Reevely, who's our historical researcher and has spent a lot of his life just trying to piece together the story and what happened and where the ship could have sunk. So for 40 years he's been doing this, and he's gone through archives all around the world collecting eyewitness accounts and studying the weather and the sea state and the wind, assessing what that ballast mound would look like, interpreting other ships' logs that might have seen them, doing damage assessments. That's where that eyewitness account from midshipman Fanning comes in handy. Peter's also the author of a chapter in Jean Boudreau's John Paul Jones and the Bonhomme Richard, if you can ever get hold of that. It's a really good read. Another aspect of our research was done with drift patterning. So Professor Peter Guth at the U.S. Naval Academy worked with us on that, and that involves figuring out hydrodynamically how the ship with 5 feet of water in its hold might have drifted. Okay, so lots that go into this before you even go to sea. So you might be thinking, well, why not just read the log? There must be a log, and there is. This is a transcription of just a small part of the log. And it, unfortunately, with the battle and then trying to care for the wounded and trying to repair the ship to get her to sail again, there's a 20-hour gap in the log. So if only it were that easy. And that 20-hour gap is really the part that we need. So what would we expect to find? So we're thinking about, it's a ship that's 230-something years old. It's wood. And wood doesn't last that long on the bottom of the North Sea. It's a very dynamic environment. So we would be looking more for a debris field, not what you normally see as a shipwreck where it's sitting proud on the bottom and it's got the name on it, and none of that. It's going to be a lot harder than that. We would look for metal, iron that's left that does seem to survive in seawater. If it's not rusted out, if it's buried, it survives fairly well. We look for glass, ceramic, china, things that don't degrade easily, remnants of smaller arms, coin. And we expect this to be a partially or mostly buried site. Another thing that we would look for is called concretion. And these are some examples of concretions. And this happens when iron meets seawater. And there's some chemical reactions that take place. And the iron creates a corrosion product, and it kind of just melds everything around it into one kind of blob. And it's really hard to tell what things are. It's like if you had a box of chocolates and you left it in your car on a hot day. I think everybody's probably done that. And it comes out into this just melted ball of chocolate. So they don't actually melt, but they join together. So you can tell it's really hard to tell what these are. If you didn't look really closely at this, you could think that was a big weird looking rock. So that just adds to the challenge. Okay, so here's your first quiz, and you don't have to record anything, just do yourself. What do you think this object is? This is a heavily concreted something. Looks like it has some little stones and bits of marine life, maybe. If you guessed gun, correct. This is what it looks like when it's x-rayed. And then this is when it's all conserved and cleaned up. So it looks quite different from the first picture. So how will we know that we've found the Bonhomme Richard, that particular ship? Fortunately, there's some insignias on some of the metal objects. The anchors would have insignias on them. The cannon would have boundary markings. People were very proud of their work back then. So we know for sure that the cannons were made in France. We found, think that's another thing. Things would be in French, right? If you found any markings, they would likely be in French because the ship was built there. The iron knees are interesting. So a knee this is an example of a wooden ship. And these are just the supports between decks that hold them together, the L-shaped. And Jones said, I want a really sturdy warship. So he had iron knees instead of wood. We might look for weapons of that time period. We can do some research matching up the dimensions of the wooden planking and the frames of the ship. And if we found artifacts suggesting military function, that would be helpful. Personal effects are interesting. So John Paul Jones's personal effects never made it off the ship. When the ship was sinking and everybody moved over onto the Serapis, he sent a small boat back with some of his crew to go and collect his personal belongings. Well, they never made it to the ship because it was too dangerous. The ship was going down, they came back. So we know that his personal effects are still there somewhere. This picture of a mug, a tankard, is interesting because the crew would tend to carve their initials in their mugs. So if we had enough circumstantial evidence finding artifacts that had folks' initials in them that we could trace back, then that adds to our case. This is kind of cool to look at. This is out of 380 people on that ship. You can see the countries. Interesting to note that there's French, Irish, English. So it wasn't just American crew. These are folks from different parts of the world. The DO means ditto, meaning same as above. Okay, so the next two slides they're kind of voluminous, but they're not meant for you to absorb everything. They're just meant to show the scope of this project over the last 15 years. And we've had tremendous support from the US Navy, from the French Navy. Interesting to note submarine NR1 here. That's a naval research submarine with a 12-man crew that I had the pleasure of spending 5 days on. And that's a kind of a rare thing to get to a scientist on the NR1. They surveyed 425 nautical miles. Now, our whole search area is about 700, 800. So to be that productive in the 3 weeks that we had her is just amazing. They moved us forward quite a bit with the surveying. And this is more recent times. Again, you can still see that strong French support there. We have the shared patrimony, right, of this ship. And 2019, unfortunately, that mission was canceled due to some international politics. What else is new, right? So I don't want it to seem like this, it's easy to do is to get the US and the French navies on board with wanting to use this mission to accomplish some of their tasks. So there always has to be some strong benefits to the Navy in order to send these kinds of assets out there. And a lot of times that's training for them, the diver training, it's testing out a new technology. It can be international relations is a big one as well. So they always have to be able to achieve their objectives as well. And all of this is accomplished through networking and relationship building. And it's helpful to go to Naval Academy football games and have a friend that invites you to the high-level parties and be able to talk with the influential people who can actually champion this from within and help you to organize these expeditions. Okay, these are some of the technologies that we've used. Again, we've had quite the spectrum. So the first image is a remotely operated vehicle, and that takes underwater video that transmits back to the ship, and you can watch it as it's doing its thing. This is a side scan sonar that's towed behind the ship, and that's our most used survey technology. And I'll show you some of those images in a minute. We had a team of divers, French Navy divers. This is submarine NR1 that I mentioned previously. See, it's so small. This is a type of magnetometer called a gradiometer, and that helps detect metal in the seabed. And then this is an autonomous underwater vehicle, and that's technology that you can program to go by itself, and it goes out and it swims and it surveys, and then it comes back and you take the data off it. All right, here's another little quiz for you. So out of these sonar images, these are all what we call targets, right? Targets is just anything that looks out of the ordinary that we think is worthy of further investigation. So if you had to choose one that you think, based on everything that you've heard so far, which one do you think would be most interesting? And shadows are important here too. You can tell almost more from the shadow than you can from the images. So if you guess number 2, you're right on. This is what this target first looked like when we went over it with sonar. It was the last hour of the last day of a French Navy mission, and we couldn't get back to it on that trip, so we had to wait a year. It can be a little frustrating. You can see here all the grainy stuff is seabed, and what stands out are these linear features. That's what we look for, because usually the linear features are man-made. Sometimes they fool us, but these look pretty well like man-made objects. So after the mission, the French Navy took all the data and they said, okay, we're going to make a mosaic, which is normal practice when you're surveying. You can see these kind of strips in this image. Oops, sorry. And each strip gets kind of pieced together, and you get a bigger picture of the area that you're looking at. And so this image is actually this part on the bottom. And so I got an email from the French Navy saying, hey, you might want to look at this because we think this site is a lot bigger than what we saw originally. And they're correct. So you can see there's a linear feature here. There's a big feature here. You can pick out kind of the linear features. These are sand waves, by the way, the squigglies. They're just a few inches tall. So we have this debris field measuring about 18 by 60 meters. It's pretty close to the dimensions. It's within the realm of the dimensions of the Bonhomme Richard. So we call this target 131. It's just a random assignment of numbers. It's the 131st target that we found on that mission. And keep in mind that a target can be anything from a rock to something like this. It's just our nomenclature. But I think it's going to make a great title for the movie when it comes out. I'm just kidding. We don't have a movie yet. Okay, so the next year, we finally got to look at this target up close. And this is with a remotely operated vehicle, which takes color video. So first thing we came upon was this anchor, right? Good news. It's not a rock. It's actually something man-made. And the dimensions of it, 2.75 meters and then 1.5 meter from fluke to fluke. These actually fit with the dimensions, give or take a couple inches, with the dimensions of the smallest anchor, not the bower anchors, but the smallest anchor called the kedge anchor on the Bonhomme Richard. And the shape of it is important because it has this round, more of a round structure than this British type anchor. You can see the different, it's much more angular. So that's a clue. Now, does that mean that it's definitely French? No, we don't know that yet. It just means that it's probably not British, but other countries had anchors that could have looked the same. But it's a clue, and it so far has not disproved anything. Sometimes it's easier to disprove a wreck than prove it. Okay, this is the end of the anchor, and it has a ring on it. This is white coral, it's soft coral that goes on everything, and it just obscures your vision of a lot of things. But the ring is telling because that means it was used with rope as opposed to chain. If it had chain, it would have a shackle on here that connects the chain to it. We didn't see any evidence of chain around it. Didn't see any evidence of a shackle. So the next thing we looked at, starting to get excited now, a lot of wooden planking that looks like it has been buried and unburied for quite a while, because these are two different sections. There's actually three different sections of planking. They all appear to be one continuous structure, and parts of it has sand over it, and then it gets uncovered, and then there's sand and uncovered. So I took these photos to the Mystic Seaport Museum, where we have offices, and they're a museum that does a lot of old ship restoration. And so I took it to the shipyard, and the guys there thought that it could be inner hull planking. If you see down here, it's kind of crisscrossed. So again, we're not sure yet what that is. We know it's planking, but not sure what part of the ship. Okay, so the following year, we finally got divers, French Navy divers, who, this is what they see, just to give you an idea of how difficult it is. And this team of divers were explosive ordnance divers, so they're usually down here dealing with mines, some of which can be live. So they wear GoPros on their head, GoPro cameras, so that they can, look around and film what they're doing and seeing. So you can see that pesky white coral is on everything. But what that means is that it's attached to something. And that's usually the big giveaway for how much stuff is right under that seabed. So usually it's attached to wood or rocks or iron. It's not very fluffy. And so with 7 minutes on the bottom per dive, this is all they can see. They've got dive lights. This is another diver over here with his light shining down. So it's very, very difficult. Okay, so the divers start bringing up little artifacts. And I saw this one, and shipwreck fever set in, because you look at it and you say, oh, it's charred, it's black, that had to be from a fire. And it's easy to kind of get ahead of yourself and to see what you want to see and believe that that's exactly what it is. But the truth is, we don't know. This very likely could be carbon that leaches out from iron. So if that wood is sitting next to iron, the wood takes on the carbon after a while, and it makes that black color. And the piece of wood below, what interests me here, and I'm sure there's probably somebody on this webinar who could shed some light on this, but these little craters. I can't find anybody who can tell me what these little craters are. We know that shipworms, which is a type of mollusk, make these little trails, but I'm not sure what makes these. And so, of course, your mind goes to, oh, it's from shot. It's got that rusty look. Could that have been grape shot or some kind of shot? So again, another little clue, but not entirely sure. This object, the divers found rolling around on the bottom. So this is not this object, but this is their drawing. It was too big to recover to look at in closer. So they said it had a metal ring on it, about 10 centimeters by 1 centimeter, and it had two pieces of long wood in it that were covered in sea life and half degraded. This is what it looked like if you were looking at it from straight on angle. So what we think this could be is part of a spar and the spar hoop around it. So the spar are the horizontal supports for the sails, and the dimensions of it would match the uppermost spar on the Bonhomme Richard. And this is give or take a few inches here and there, but it's hard to tell with everything covered in coral and sea life. So this is just an example on the lower left of a mast. There's a mast and a mast tube, and it just shows you how they had to sometimes just cobble together a big piece of wood to make that mast. Okay, so the next artifact that came up was a dead-eye block, and it's called a dead-eye because somebody long ago thought that the three holes in it looked like the eyes and nose socket of a sheep's skull. Go figure. But what blows me away about this is the lanyards were still in it. Lanyards meaning the ropes here. So this is part of the standing rigging of a sailing vessel. So now we're getting pretty excited because we know that we have an old wooden sailing vessel. We haven't seen anything on the site that's modern, like a boiler or some pipes. To show you the level of preservation, if you can imagine, so this is sticking upright in the sand. This is the part that the diver sees. So all of this part from here down is buried, and it's in fantastic shape. You can still see the grains of the wood. So anything that's buried in the seabed, which is probably most of this wreck, is going to be very well preserved. I think archaeologists are going to be pretty excited about that. Okay, we have a little mystery. So this is forged stud link chain. Theoretically, that did not come into play until the early 1800s, right? We know that the Bonhomme Richard had a rudder chain. That's all we know. We don't know much about it. But what's interesting about this is this chain was found at the very top of the site up here. The anchor's down here, 60 meters away. And the chain was wrapped around a big concretion. Remember those big iron objects melted together, wrapped around it as if like in a U shape, like if it got hung up on that object. And there were little bits here and there hanging around. So one theory is that the chain is intrusive to the site. Maybe somebody's trawl net hung up on that object and split off some of the chains. So we don't know. We just know that it was pretty far from the anchor, but it remains a mystery. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dan, who's going to take you to our latest expedition and discuss some of the findings there.
Great, thanks, Melissa. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to talk about the last official expedition in the search for the Bonhomme Richard. So here's some images that I just put up of the USNS Grasp, which is the ship that we sailed on for this expedition. In fact, my virtual background is on the deck of the Grasp. This is the same ship that Melissa had been on in 2011 for same expedition purpose. But it's a Safeguard class Navy salvage ship, about 250 feet in length. It specializes in recovering and towing submerged objects and has the infrastructure to support manned diving ops. So, very well fitted for a search like this. Certainly designed for function and not comfort. We were out at sea on this expedition for about a week. During that time, I was in a 32-man stateroom, and in my bunk, I was about within arm's reach of about 5 people. So you can imagine the snoring that kept me up at night. But I was fortunate enough to be out on this expedition with Melissa, as well as Captain John McGrath. McGrath was the captain of the NR-1 submarine mission in 2008 that Melissa was part of. The expedition was a great opportunity for groups within the U.S. Navy to train their staff on how to use various marine technologies, and it served as a great opportunity to help build international partnerships with the French Navy. So we had 3 groups that we were working with. Within the U.S. Navy, we had the Naval Oceanography Mine Warfare Center, or NOMWIC, and they brought a Remus 100 AUV, or autonomous underwater vehicle. The French Navy brought a Klein side scan sonar, which was a towed unit, and the Naval History and Heritage Command, or NHHC, brought a towed magnetometer unit, and I'll show you pictures of those in a second. GFOE's role on this expedition was serving as science advisors and lead coordinators. And of course, Melissa brought with her many years of institutional knowledge and experience in this hunt. So it really was a team effort. So here's some photos of the devices that I mentioned earlier. At the top left, you'll see the Remus 100 AUV that NOMWIC brought. And it's, like I said, an autonomous unit that can be deployed and can survey a predefined grid with a side scan sonar, as well as other various instruments. And in the top right, you'll see the Klein side scan sonar. It's a towed unit that the French Navy brought. So produces similar images as the Remus, as we'll see in a bit. The Naval History and Heritage Command brought a towed magnetometer unit, which can detect ferrous metallic materials, even those that are buried under the sediment. So obviously useful in detecting shipwreck remains. All three of these devices were deployed from small boats, like the ones that you see in the bottom right. And this was nice because it allowed all three teams to work simultaneously during the day. So how it would work is the three teams would go out during working hours during the day, and they'd bring back the data for the GFOE team to evaluate and process in the evenings. So obviously for those of us on the data processing side, not out on the small boats, the days were a little slow. Fortunately, we did have some entertainment, including the ship corgi named Barney. Many hours of entertainment there with the dog, a novelty out on a ship. So we operated in this mode for about a week, and here are some of the results. The red boxes that you see on this map are 4 areas of interest that were identified from previous expeditions and studies. We had a very ambitious survey plan to survey this very large area, which is a total of about 7 square nautical miles. And for those of you who aren't familiar, 1 nautical mile is 1.15 standard miles, so close to a standard mile that you're used to. So obviously a very large area here. And because we didn't want all the devices being operated in the same area for safety reasons, the French team focused on box 3, and the Remus AUV team focused on box 1. All the points, all the targets that you see on this map are objects of interest that were detected with the side scan sonars on those units. The blue targets representing objects picked up by the French team, and the green targets picked up by the AUV team. All 3 teams that we partnered with did surveys of wreck site 131. And obviously there's a lot of targets on here, so a lot of things that we found. However, most of these are probably geologic or possibly other marine debris. If you look closely, you'll see a set of yellow targets in both the areas. And these are what we determined to be targets of interest and potentially worth surveying again to try to further identify them. However, there were no strong leads. There was nothing obvious that stood out at us as being cultural artifacts from the Bonhomme Richard. So this is a close-up site of wreck site 131, and there's a scale on the side for you. That's 300 feet. Just for reference, the length of the Bonhomme Richard ship, as Melissa mentioned, was about 147 feet. I'll just point out that the numbers associated with these targets are arbitrary from the team that picked them up, so they're not related to the numerical code 131 for this wreck site. But so each individual target on this map is correlated with an object of interest, such as the side scan images that you see on the sides of the screen. And those are close-up images. On the left side, you'll see images that were detected by the Remus, and you have scales there for reference. For instance, like the top left, kind of looks like it could be planking. The middle left looks like it could be, some kind of man-made cultural artifact. And there's a debris field on the bottom left. And on the right side are images picked up by the French team and their towed side scan unit. There's some really well-defined, elongated objects. However, keep in mind that the mind sees what it wants to. So because we're looking for a shipwreck, we're going to want to see shipwreck objects in these very fuzzy images. But it's very likely or possible that these could be natural or geologic features. But again, we use the tools to the best of our ability. We did the best evaluations that we could and really tried to sort through all the images that were detected to try to pick out the ones that are of interest for further study. If you look at the map in the middle, again, the yellow and green targets are from this expedition. The black ship symbols are targets of interest from previous expeditions. Now, all of these targets are of interest because of their proximity to Wreck Site 131. However, it's the yellow ones, the starred ones, that really caught our attention and are going to be worth going back to in the future. So, unfortunately, again, there were no conclusive results, and we didn't find anything that was obviously related to the Bonhomme Richard. But it was a successful expedition. We got 5.5 out of 7 days. We lost 1.5 days to weather. We ended up serving a cumulative total of about 3.4 square nautical miles between all of the groups that we worked with. We found 14 new objects of interest around Wreck Site 131 and over 200 objects of interest in other areas. So it was a successful survey. However, we really need to be able to go back with divers or an ROV and take a closer look at Wreck Site 131 to prove or disprove its identity. We really need the ability to go down and pick up objects and bring them back up to the surface for evaluation, even if we have to put them back down on the bottom after that. But that's really the best way to identify objects from this wreck. And here's an image of the tomb of John Paul Jones. He is buried under the Naval Academy Chapel in Annapolis, Maryland. He's been there since 1913, so over 100 years. And this is a subject for a different webinar maybe, but the story of how he got here is really interesting. It involves a 6-year search in the early 1900s because he was originally buried in Paris in a not very well documented place. But the team did go out and find his body and bring it back to the US. So I'd recommend doing some further reading on your own if you're interested in that. And we would love to one day be able to bring back artifacts from his flagship and display it here in the Naval Academy one day. And so with that, I think Melissa's going to have some concluding remarks, and then we'll take some questions.
Yeah, I'm actually going to save my concluding remarks because it just I've been on the chat function here with a special guest who I wasn't sure was going to make it today. So Adrien Char, we call Adrien in French, it's Adrien. So he is online with us, and I'm going to unmute you because he's agreed to share his dive. He's going to tell us the story of his dive because he is the diver and also the commanding officer on the ship that brought up the Deadeye block. So I'm really thrilled that he's here and willing to talk about it. Okay, so Adrien, are you there?
Hi there, Melissa. Do you copy?
Yes, very good.
Okay, great. Good morning, or I don't know what time is it in the US. Hi everyone. So I'm Commander Adrien Shaw from the French Navy, and in 2014, as Melissa told you, I was a commanding officer of a French volcano, but I was also one of the 2 divers who had the opportunity to dive on target 131, and that was during this bit incredible dive that I found the Deadeye block. This dive was will stay quite a souvenir for me because something bad happened during this dive. So I found this artifact, but I also had a failure on my breasting apparatus, which was a semi-closed circuit rebreather, and there was an issue with the gas I was breathing, so I lost conscience, and we were 75 meters deep, and my body luckily brought me up to the surface, and hence saved my life. good luck. Luckily too, he was carrying the artifact, and I was carrying the tools. So he managed to bring up the artifact, and I lost the tools, which was not a big deal. And this dive ended in the chamber for both of us, in the recompression chamber, because we went up in something like 2 minutes, I think, whereas we should have respected a time of decompression underwater of 34 minutes. But luckily, because my team was already ready, they put me in under oxygen in the dinghy. I was in the chamber less than 3 minutes after popping up in the surface. Well, I ended up with after I think 3 hours of decompression inside the box, I ended up with no consequences of this dive. The only consequence being that I wasn't able to dive for 1 more month, so I wasn't able to dive for the rest of the mission on the Bonhomme Richard, but that wasn't really a big deal. And I want to tell you this moment on the quarterdeck of the ship when I got out of the chamber, and Melissa was really worried because of what happened to my partner and me. And but while I was in the chamber, she had like more than 3 hours to try to guess what this artifact was. And when I got out of the chamber, she was on the quarterdeck, and I asked her, Melissa, was it worth it? And she went crying of emotion, saying, hey, Captain, you're not allowed to make fun on this situation. You could have passed away, and so voila. Is that okay for you, Melissa?
That's, yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I still have trouble listening to it, but really appreciate it. Was a probably the scariest few hours of 15 years of expedition. But all right, thank you so much, Adrian. I'm gonna mute you just for okay. So that was Adrian's side of things. My side of things for that dive was, as you mentioned, it was pretty emotional. We just, my little team there would sit out on the deck and watch the rubber boat go out to the site and watch the divers, and we knew it was about a 35-40 minute dive altogether, as Adrian mentioned, and so about 10 minutes into a dive, we see the boat coming back at just as fast as it could possibly go, and all of a sudden the ship, everyone on the ship, just was a buzz on the ship, and people started moving really rapidly through the passageways, and we knew something was wrong. We said it's way too early for this to be happening. And so I always remember this, the executive officer of the ship. So here we are, we don't speak French, and it takes time for folks to stop and explain to us what's going on. So the executive officer, I remember hurrying by us, and she saw my face, and she said 5 words. She said, "It's the CO, commanding officer, it's bad." And I just, oh man, all these things go through your head, and you can't lose somebody on this mission, on any mission. It's just not worth it. And that pile of stuff on the bottom of the ocean quickly just disappears from the priority list. So very worried about Adrian and his dive buddy, but fortunately all's well that ends well. And so thanks for that, Adrian. Okay, so I think we can take some questions. Dan, if you want to MC that.
Sure, and I apologize. Apparently my neighbor is getting their lawn mowed right now, so there might be some background noise. Yeah, we've got a question here that asks, has there been an educational component to this journey? Have any universities been involved?
Yes, as a matter of fact, the U.S. Naval Academy has been very involved for a couple of years. In partnership with them, we created the first online course at the Academy, which was about the history, science, and technology of shipwrecks, and it used the Bonhomme Richard search as a theme. So it was a mixture of, in-person lectures and online work, and the cool part about it was that we had room on the 2010 and 2011 expeditions to take midshipmen out with us, students from the Naval Academy. So the ones who had taken the course applied to go, and we ended up being able to accommodate 5 of them over the 2 years. And that was just an extremely rewarding experience. That was a highlight as well, me being an educator especially. So yes, and we would love to have other partnerships with schools, universities as well.
Great. So I just want to make a note to everybody that we have about 10 minutes left. And if you have any questions, please go ahead and type it in the Q&A chat section. Toby W. asks, is there one single artifact you might find that would ID 131 as the BHR?
Sure. In the ideal world, which if you know shipwreck hunting, the bell is kind of like the holy grail. So the ship's bell, but it wouldn't say Bonhomme Richard. It would say the ship was actually outfitted from another, it was redone from an earlier version of itself, and it was called the Duc de Duras. D-U-C, it's French, D-U-C, D-E, I think. Duras, D-U-R-A-S. So the bell would actually say that on it, we think. Any personal effects from John Paul Jones that we could trace would be helpful as well. But I think it's going to be a case based on circumstantial evidence, at least if we can do more work on this. But, sometimes you get lucky, and if you can trace the cannon foundry engravings back there, we could have some really good evidence. So thanks for that question.
Great. Here's a really good question. Jim Kozinski asks, if the Bonhomme Richard were found, what country would claim possession?
Leave it to Jim to ask me that. So that's actually the question that killed the 2019 expedition. You can look at it either way, right? So it was a French ship that they put a lot of money into retrofitting or upfitting for Jones purposes. We never paid them back. We lost the ship. But then again, it was flying the flag of America, and it was commanded by an American captain. So the maritime lawyers are kind of going all around on this, and I honestly don't know what that decision will ever look like. You would hope that if it comes to be a standstill about that there could be some kind of joint management of the wreck, which there's precedent for. There's plenty of artifacts. There will be plenty of artifacts to go around. So that decision is going to be made at a much higher level than me. But it's a great question, and it's very debatable.
Great. Here's an interesting one. Dan Distel asks, I study the wood-boring bivalves, shipworms that eat the wrecks that you like to study. Did you observe any of these critters alive or dead?
I did not. We only had, a couple of those little pieces of wood that then everything, by the way, was put back on the site. We didn't take anything with us. So I did not observe any critters, and I wasn't in critter mode, even though I'm a biologist. But no, nothing evident, Dan.
A lot of questions pouring in now, which is great. Have any other shipwrecks been identified during the search for the Bonhomme Richard? That's a question from Sean Burke.
Well, we've probably looked at about 24 wrecks over the years, just checking them out to make sure they were not the Bonhomme Richard, and you saw some of those sonar images. And as far as identifying them, we honestly didn't spend a lot of time. Once we knew it was not the Bonhomme Richard, we moved on because time is so precious out there, and you have these assets for a specified time period. You don't want to waste a second. So, but there was nothing that was evident in the identification of other wrecks. And then, the one big intact wreck that we found that looked like it was iron or steel, where it was so encumbered by that white coral that we actually tried to look at that and see if there was a name on the fantail, but we couldn't see anything. So I guess the answer is no.
Okay. Art Cherbanus asks, the late Clive Cussler had conducted some search efforts for BHR. Has there been any sharing from that group of their search efforts?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that, because another pretty poignant story. We had contacted Clive very early on, like in 2006, and didn't really get much reception there. Just last year, he called me out of the blue, and I think he was in his late 80s, and he called me and said, "I just thought it would be really fun to talk about, your adventure and my adventure." And so we did. We chatted for about half an hour, and I said, "I'll keep you informed," and I sent him some pictures of the wreck site. And for those of you who may not know, Clive Cussler is a very famous author of adventure writing with themes of shipwrecks. He's an avid shipwreck hunter, and has found things like the CSS Hunley. So anyway, so we chatted for a while, and that was kind of it. And I didn't hear from him after I'd emailed him. And then just recently, a couple months ago, Peter Reevely, our common friend, said, "Oh, Clive is trying to get in touch with you." And he said he's called you a few times, but he hasn't been able to reach you. And I never got anything on my phone. I don't know if he's calling the right number. And so I was trying to figure out, when to call him back. I wanted to have a good block of time. And so I was planning on calling him the following week. And Peter Reevely called me before that and said Clive had passed away. So I never got to know, what he wanted or what he was trying to talk about. So poignant story there.
Great. And I think we have time for maybe one more question. Steve McConey asks, is there one lesson, one message based upon your journey that you would like to share with the audience?
Oh man. I think, it sounds really cliche, and I've only been able to grasp it as I get older, but it's important to enjoy the journey and not the destination so much. We would enjoy the destination, of course, but the journey has been extraordinary, and you meet so many people and you come together for this common cause, and you have to appreciate that even for a second, if you're interacting with all these different people who are personally invested in the mission, it impacts you, and it helps shape your life in very positive ways. So that's kind of the message that I take from this. And for the 650 people who have been to sea with me on these missions, I appreciate every one of you. And I know there's a lot of you on this webinar as well. So thanks for that.
Okay. Well, did you want to
take a couple more questions, Dan? If you could stay on.
Sure. Let's see. Will Rainey asks, or he says he's from the U.S. Navy. He says there's a question from his son Elvis. How many artifacts have been brought up?
Ooh, let's see. Not that many. I mean, we're thinking, we're talking about the divers, only what they can carry pretty much in their hands. So there were the pieces of wood, maybe a couple other pieces of wood. So let's see, maybe half a dozen, maybe 6, and they were all put back on the site. But that's a great question.
Let's see. There's a lot of questions coming in. This is great. Maybe we'll, if people have more questions, they'll have to send some emails later on. But
Sure.
Let's see. So Claude Barub asks, regarding dimensions of planking and frames, what are you using for a reference point? And they mentioned that we have scale models of the ship at the USNA Museum.
Yeah, and that's, believe me, we have been there, been there numerous times. Peter Reevely, I think, has spent some time there studying that model. But there are, in Jean Boudreau's book that Peter authored a chapter in, and then there's another book, I can't remember the name of it, also by the same author, but it kind of lays out in more detail the dimensions of things like the anchors and the cannons and the planking as well. So we've been using Jean Boudreau's reference material for the most part, but have visited your museum for sure and seen the model. Dan, you're muted.
Sure. Maybe one more question here from William Dudley. Are there plans for a 2020 or 2021 dive for BHR?
Oh, I wish I could say yes. I wish. But we do not have any plans. You know, part of the reason for this webinar was to keep the conversation going in the hopes that, you know, there's get a groundswell of support to try to get another mission together. It's, you know, with the Navy's dealing with what they're dealing with these days and probably for the foreseeable. I'm not sure how good our chances would be, but for now, we don't have anything planned. Thanks, Bill.
Okay, so it's just after 1 o'clock. Do you have any just closing thoughts, Melissa?
I do. I think we've sort of touched on them a little bit, but you know, sometimes the project seems to stall out a little bit. Sometimes we go 4 years without getting back in the water. And it is important to keep this conversation going. And we can be creative about that. We can do things that don't involve going to sea, like education initiatives, maybe a course, or speaking engagements, or writing publications, things like that. You know, I'm open to ideas for partnerships. So I'll ask you just kind of to talk about it. You know, tell somebody, if you like the webinar, tell them about this cool webinar and go check us out online at bonhommerichard.org. Just to raise the awareness of it is helpful, because you never know who you come in contact with. That could be helpful. And we appreciate your interest, because that's, I mean, quite honestly, a lot of the times that's what keeps me going, is that people really do seem to care about the project, and they care. And I can't tell you the number of people who, whenever I haven't seen them for a long time, their first question to me is, so did you find it yet? And I have to say, well, I think we might have, but we're trying to prove it. So I want to just thank you all for your interest. We had a sold out webinar here today. Appreciate it.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. A lot of questions we didn't get to, so feel free to use the email addresses at the bottom of the screen and to follow up with us. Yeah, thank you, everybody, for joining.